Hello, I'm Jana Al-Jadid, a volunteer from the Youth Communication team, and I'm here today speaking with DSRGs to discuss the economic growth and diversification and share the voices of young people in Libya. First, could you please introduce yourself and explain your role within the UNSMIL?
Hi, Jana. It's really a pleasure to speak with you today. My name is Ulrika Richardson. I am the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General here in Libya and also the resident coordinator of the UN system here in Libya. I arrived here in September last year. I'm Swedish by nationality, but I've been working more than 30 years in the UN system. So my role here in Libya is basically within the political mission. My role is to work on the economic track, to lead on the economic track, meaning how the economic solutions can actually be a contribution to the political stability and also to the security stability of Libya. The other side of my role here in Libya is to coordinate the work on the development and humanitarian agencies, the UN agencies. Many of you know many of them, like UNDP, IOM, WHO, UNHCR, for example, just to mention a few. And that is basically to support the Libyan population in terms of, and the Libyan authorities, the institutions work closely with them in terms of working on increasing development opportunities for the Libyan population across the country.
Thank you. So I'll be asking you some questions, which is like the most questions you'd ask today. The first question, why is the economic diversification topic important for youth today? And why should young people care about the structure they live?
Well, if I would be young and a young, let's say, a Libyan woman, economy is a central part of how a country works, right? Yeah. You have political institutions, you have parliamentary institutions, but basically, how does a country, with what does a country actually function? It's of course it's finances, right? It has its resources, and it has how these resources are being managed. In Libya's case, oil is a significant resource. How is that resource managed, right? Yeah. How is that resource managed not only to make sure that Libyans have access to education, to healthcare, to water, to infrastructure, etc., but also how it is invested into new opportunities. And that's where, as a young person, I would really see my role as being interested in how the economy and the resources are managed, because it's about my opportunities. And not only, it's about my friends' opportunities, and it's also, if I grow older, when I create a family, for example, if I do, then it's also about future generations. So as a young person, I would be extremely interested into the economic health of my country. And the strategic dialogue is actually trying to gather Libyans, experts on the economy, but also experts on other things, whether it's on the banking system, for example, or professors or politicians, to basically come up with what are some of the needed reforms that we can do, that Libya can do right now, could adopt right now, that would improve the economic situation and that would in turn help to stabilize the political situation. So yes, you should be very interested.
Yeah, well, that takes me to my next question. How does the United Nations collaborate with national institutions and private sector to support diversified and sustainable economy in Libya, talking in general or specifically?
So if we talk about the political mission, UNSMIL has a role of facilitating the brokering of a solution to the political stalemate, to the political status quo that we are seeing. That is really, in a way, not sustainable for the longer run. It's in a transition. This transition needs to end, and there needs to be more of a long-term, predictable political, let's say, settlement in place. And with that, of course, when you have a political tranquility, when you have government, parliamentary institutions that work in a let's say in a regularized fashion, it's much easier to develop policies, to adopt policies, to develop new legislation, to adopt new legislation, so that you can improve not only livelihoods for the population and opportunities, as I was saying, but also how these opportunities are financed. And so the UN's role is to, and UNSMIL's role is to facilitate that political solution, right? So it's not, it can't decide, and it's not the role for the United Nations to decide. Libya is our member state. You know, the United Nations is intergovernmental, which means that Libya has invited the UN to its country, and this is the role of the United Nations, of UNSMIL. And it's a role that also has been given and endorsed by the UN Security Council, right? So it's to facilitate, bring people to the table, right? Different actors, Libyan actors, and try and broker and facilitate solutions, agreements that could bring the country closer to a solution. Then when it comes to UN agencies, United Nations agencies, the role is also to work very closely with institutions and authorities in developing policies, economic policies, but could also be environmental policies, energy policies, right? Housing, health, education, all of that matters to every individual, to every person that lives here in Libya.
Can you talk about one of the programs that directly targets young people?
Well, we have the Ride Up program, right, which is facilitated by UNSMIL, and I think you're very well aware of that. And that is it's a program that provides opportunities for young people to learn, to connect with each other, but also to connect with other young people, right? And I think that is a type of opportunity that gives you a lot of skill, not only, let's say, the traditional skill in terms of, you know, that would facilitate you to have a job, or that could, you know, as you would learn in school, for example, but the soft skills about leadership, about having the confidence to be able to express your opinion, right? And to do so in consultation with others, right? So that type of a very friendly, respectful interaction with peers, that is so important when you want to bring solutions to the table that can improve for people in general. You need to know how do you talk to each other, and this is, I think, that Ride Up program is providing.
Yes.
But there are other programs also. Of course, there are programs here in, for example, on young people. The youth councils, for example. How can we bring them together? And so they're really, and I would encourage every young person who is interested in the UN to look at our websites, because there's a lot of resources there on different initiatives and programs and other opportunities.
So these opportunities are for all young people, not specifically. So right, that someone might say, well, my brother will say, it's just a girls' program, whereas like boys in these programs.
Well, I can't say if I think RIDAT is it's open for girls in particular, and there are opportunities that boys have as well. So not all of the opportunities are targeting young people, but we are not excluding young people. Then there are opportunities that particularly target young people. For example, you might have heard about the Ecovision, the initiative we had were basically giving opportunities for young people who want to engage in startups, who want to engage in small entrepreneurship initiatives, right? And that was one opportunity. Then we need to make sure that we also, when you have startups and these type of small entrepreneurship initiatives from young people, how do you get access to finances, to credits, to then be able to actually expand your private sector ideas, right? So that they can grow and nurture and so on. So there are several activities here, not all focus on young people, but most do. And also, let's face it, Libya has a very young population, right?
Yeah, yes.
And what is very important for you as young people, I would imagine, is having a job at some point, right? Having a good education, having a stable life, and then having a job eventually. And we know that a lot of young people in Libya do not have job opportunities.
Yeah, you could like have a good education and then couldn't find a job.
Exactly. Yeah. So what type of education, for example? You could go to university, and many who do. I did myself. But there is also those who would like to have a vocational training, maybe go into a more already a training that that aims at a job, whether it's being a nurse or a teacher or a mechanic, right?
That moves on to the next question. What is the most important economic sector Libya should prioritize to diversify its economy and create job opportunities for young people in the coming years, in your opinion?
Well, I think that there is not one most important. I think Libya has enormous potential to develop a very rich and diversified economy. You have a very important base. You have the oil, which gives you resources that can be invested into diversifying that resource. So with you could help to, I think here you have a lot of opportunities in, for example, in agribusiness. If you look at the vastness of your territory, the fact that you probably have significant water resources. There are data that indicates that there are a lot of water. You need to find it, and you need to, again, manage that water resource really well. But if you manage to grow food here, for example, right? And I know that there are delicious some foods that are already being grown here. Like I know there is the upcoming watermelon season that is coming. But there is so much more, because right now, most of your food is imported. 80% of food is imported. And you can imagine what that cost, the cost to the economy, right? Yeah. And the cost to the consumer, because that adds on a tariff on the price.
Yeah, yes.
So, but you have the tourism sector. If this country would be having the reputation of being tranquil, right? Safe, it's so beautiful that you could have thousands of tourists coming here every year.
Thank you very much.